All right, so we can get started with our career chat. I'm really excited to introduce Yael Misrahi, who is generously joining us today to talk about her career. So I'll read your bio, Yael, but then feel free to introduce yourself and say any opening statements you want. But first, to introduce myself, I'm Tova. I've been working with AMP Global Youth for a few years now. I joined in the summer of 2020 as I'm also an alumni of the program. So I did a program with Moroccan youth centered around COVID-19, and I love all the work we do here. Now I kind of do content creation and run some of these career chats. So really excited to be here with you all today. And now to introduce Yael, who is a general partner at CoVelocity, who focuses on new business development, identifying new life-saving healthcare technologies and helping commercialize them to global markets. Yael has led global partnerships focusing on scalable and sustainable commercialization of medtech solutions, which she will explain what that is later because I might not know what that is, in health systems globally. And Yael started her career in international development, working with a number of international nonprofits, including Innovation Africa, the American Jewish World Service, and the Israeli Fund for UNICEF, specializing in the social impact of introducing new technologies to rural communities and low resource settings. And she has lived and worked across sub-Saharan Africa, Central America, India, the US, and the UK. Oh my gosh, that's so much to talk about. Yael holds a BA from Wellesley College in International Relations and an MA in the Interdisciplinary Center in Government and Diplomacy, and lives in London and has a husband and two daughters. So obviously very accomplished. Thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to just introduce yourself and anything you might have missed?
Thank you, Tova. I think you got it all, actually. I think the only thing that I would add is that I've been involved with AMP for a number of years, and I really had the pleasure. I still remember very clearly the summers that I got to work with some incredible students and who have very graciously kept me on Facebook. So I get to see what they're doing, and I'm just so blown away by the alumni network and everything everyone continues to accomplish. So I strongly encourage people to seek out opportunities with them.
That's amazing. Yes, I'm a big fan too, if you can't tell. But that's great. So just to start, could you talk about sort of what path your career has taken and how you discovered what you're passionate about and kind of narrowed down your interests?
That is a very good question. When I was in my final year of university at Wellesley, I took a course in international development. And before that course, I was very interested in diplomacy. I thought maybe I'll go um, into the foreign service or work in negotiations of some sort. And it was that course in international development that really changed things for me, because my family is originally from Mexico, and the combination of thinking about where they're from and then actually studying and realizing that there is a career that I could pursue that would be able to bridge the gap between wealthier nations and poor nations and different resource levels, and something that really kind of spoke to me. And so I decided to start going into international development. And that took a whole different spin when I joined a for-profit social impact company, which was in the healthcare space. And I initially was a little bit uncertain because I thought, well, all the work I've done was in nonprofits, and I was spending a lot of time in the field doing grassroots international development with small NGOs and communities. And here I was thinking of joining a healthcare company, but they hired me specifically because of my experience in East Africa and to introduce technologies in Kenya as a first market. And that actually was completely eye-opening for me because I had a chance to see a real impact that wasn't dependent on donors. So we were able to really think about how things are going to be sustainable long after we were gone. And I haven't turned back since. So I'm still very passionate about the work in healthcare. And I do think that there is a way to combine that sort of the social impact together with the commercial introduction of products and the ability to sustain the impact through through that commercialization. And I also think there is something to be said about the independence in purchasing power that a lot of the people that we work with end up having. So rather than feeling they're getting donations, they're actually making decisions about what products to buy, what's going to be beneficial for them. They can be more demanding as customers, and that's sort of the long way of saying I went from international development to kind of utilizing a lot of those skills in a commercial space within healthcare.
You sounded like when you were describing your interests as a student, it sounded like you were describing me. And I'm sure a lot of people at AMP Global Youth, right? Like we're very, we know we're passionate about like international relations and social justice and making an impact in the world, but we're kind of like trying to find our niche and how we can have that impact. So thank you for sharing kind of how you were able to narrow down your interests. I think a lot of young people think that they need to know exactly what they want to do at 18, but I think you show that you could have a really successful career and have a journey, and there's not necessarily an end point.
Oh, it
So
absolutely is a journey. Yeah.
yes, it's good to know. It's more comforting for sure. And I'm just curious how, you mentioned like the foreign service, how you feel like your current career is kind of different than the one you intended when you were a student.
Oh, I'll give you an example that happened a few months ago. Um, since I started working in healthcare 2 years ago, I actually founded my own company together with a few other partners, doing the same thing that I was doing in the former healthcare company I was working in, but for more products. So specifically looking at how to encourage a number of different manufacturers of small products, of digital apps to enter low resource settings, whether that be in more rural places in the US or more my specialty across sub-Saharan Africa, India, Central Latin America. So when I was thinking about, what I might do at some point in the future, when I was thinking about the foreign service, I kind of had an image of myself sitting in a room, kind of negotiating across, with many different stakeholders from different countries, different cultures, different languages. And a couple months ago, I found myself on a phone call with a group in China, a group in California, a group in Denmark, Israel, and myself in London. And we were all trying to work together on how to make a certain deal come through. And I was coordinating the call. And then kind of at the end of that, I thought, oh my God, this was my dream. This is actually what I wanted to do, just in a completely different setting to the one that I had anticipated. So I actually think there are a lot of similarities, and it came as a surprise because it's not something that I had planned, but it very much was that kind of image that I had of, at some point I want to sit there and say, I think this person's trying to say that. Kind of doing these cross-cultural translations.
Wow, that's great. I mean, I think it shows how, even though you ended up in a different career path than maybe you started off with, like the skills you learned and the classes you took, maybe in that more traditional international relations space, like proved just as helpful. So that's really good to know. I was just curious, it's so fascinating talking about what you were saying briefly, the differences between like charity to people and the relationships between like nonprofits and maybe people in developing countries versus the more for-profit, or I guess just more self-sufficient model you were talking about that you work in now, and the difference in interactions between stakeholders. So could you talk more about that? Because I think that sort of ethical, like looking at the sustainability of nonprofits, is like a really big hot topic now. So if you could talk about more about that.
Yeah. So I was working in a nonprofit in 2008 when the economy really collapsed, and then again in 2012, and I just saw what it did to the nonprofit world, where the rug was kind of pulled from underneath their feet, and the impact that it had, just the sort of the knock-on effect that it had on people on the ground was tremendous. And the combination of that with, then at one point I was working in another nonprofit where they got a huge donation to run a project but none of the communities actually wanted that project. And so they ended up just putting it somewhere. And I was visiting and I was in Uganda and I was looking at this project and I thought, no one actually wants this. No one actually needed it. This was basically done to make a donor feel good. Now, I think that's very rare nowadays. I think that nonprofits have changed a lot. But there is this constant pressure because there's a power dynamic between the person that's giving and those that are receiving. And just by nature it's an unequal power dynamic that's generated from that. And I think it's very, very difficult to change that. Now, the American Jewish World Service, I think, addressed it really well because fully aware, I remember this in our trainings for them, with all the programs I did with them, is they fully addressed the challenges of the disconnect and mass power dynamics and how to try to bridge it and recognize you're never fully going to be able to. So how can you at least acknowledge it? But it requires a lot of introspection, and I'm not sure that it necessarily leads to the outcomes that you want very quickly. What I found in the for-profit world, especially in the social impact companies, they also have a lot of challenges. But there's an opportunity to see someone as an equal partner. And I'm trying to work with a customer in Kenya the same way I'm trying to work with a customer in Denmark. I'm not doing anyone any favors. I'm going to work just as hard because I want to win that business. And so, and they need to be, and they're incredibly demanding of what they need from me. And so it creates a completely different power dynamic and relationship. But social impact businesses have their challenges as well. They don't necessarily generate the same revenue that you would get from us, just traditional commercial business. And so oftentimes if a company is dependent on investors, it's very similar to the to the situation you have with donors, where those investors might say, okay, I want my return now, so turn around and go and sell in the US, especially in healthcare. That happens a lot because that's where the money is. And being a healthcare system that's heavily dependent on people paying for it. So oftentimes companies are just told, nope, we have to pivot right now because I need a return. So there is still a bit of pressure there, but in terms of the dynamic and the relationship between companies and the end customer, I think that is really one way to create a very healthy dynamic there.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And those kinds of ideas you're talking about, I think, have never been more relevant with lots of social movements like Black Lives Matter or other, we're just really as a world getting, I think, more vocabulary to address those disparities, like this idea of like, I don't know, like white saviorism or like privilege and power dynamics. I think it's really cool that we're all getting that awareness of it. And you seem to have been ahead of the curve in that respect. But I was also curious how COVID-19 affected the field you're in, especially as someone working in healthcare in developing countries that were very disproportionately hit by COVID. If you could expand on that.
Sure. So actually, one of the reasons I started my business was because of COVID. I was working previously in women's health and particularly in cervical cancer screening. And cervical cancer is something that is very easy to catch if it's caught early, because it develops over the course of 5 years, from sort of initial infection until demonstration of early stage cancers. But because of that time frame, it's often neglected in the screening. And of course, when COVID hit, all of the programs that I was working with in the field just stopped screening women for cervical cancer because they didn't want to risk increasing contact with COVID. So one of the reasons that I pivoted and created this new company was because nothing was moving in that space, and there was a huge need for other things like COVID tests, gloves, just EMRs, like other basic things, telemedicine, different types of solutions that would be able to address the needs, the most immediate needs in healthcare. So it had that huge impact, and that it just completely changed from focusing on women's health to then focusing on my own business. But within that business, I would say there was a huge shift in the field towards things like telemedicine and self-testing at home. And I think in general, we've seen a huge transformation. There has also been a huge challenge with public health, both in terms of funding that's available. So a lot of basic services not being available anymore just because they're being deprioritized, not equipment being unequally distributed. So, and one of the reasons that I ended up uh, focusing on COVID tests to emerging markets, not just because that's what I was interested in, but because that's where the need was. So the US was buying up a lot of the equipment and a lot of the tests. And then when other countries needed them, they were deprioritized. And so I ended up selling to places mostly across Central America or Sub-Saharan Africa that just weren't top of the list for some of the larger companies. And so made sure that they got their COVID tests or the gloves or other things that other countries were stockpiling. So it's been a fascinating couple of years with COVID.
Wow, I'm sure. And that's amazing that you were able to see that need and kind of create a business around it. So props to you. And then I was also curious what you would say the biggest misconception about your career field is.
Oh, there are many. I would say the first one is probably um, around the markets that I choose to work in. So for anyone that's looking at sort of a more standard medical technology business, I say, wait, why are you going and trying to do business in a place like Kenya? Now, that's something that's changing very quickly. So a lot of the large healthcare companies are starting to see the opportunities in these markets. Yeah, Nigeria is a huge opportunity. India is a huge opportunity. Large companies are starting actually to initiate their work in places. You know, Babylon Health is now one of the largest providers of telemedicine in the UK for sure, and also across Europe. Started in Rwanda. So things like that is changing, but there's still the misconceptions to say, oh, okay, oh, so you're volunteering. No, it's actually a business and it is self-sustaining. And there is a future here, there is a business opportunity. That's one big one. The other one I'd probably say is within healthcare itself, that there isn't an opportunity to make it a social business, because I think a lot of very large traditional healthcare technology companies don't necessarily have that angle, or they might have a small CSR arm. But I'm saying especially with the smaller ones, there are huge groups of specifically women's health or women-led health companies that are really, really motivated by the social impact. And so I'm part of a number of organizations where, you know, either female founders or women's health focused companies just get together and talk about where can we have the biggest impact. And it's not so much about only generating revenue. We want to be self-sustaining. We want to have lucrative businesses, but it really is about trying to understand where we can have the biggest impact on the ground too.
Thank you. And then I was also wondering, do you have any tips for like high school students or college age students who might want to enter a similar career field in terms of making kind of steps earlier on in our careers?
Yes. Oh, I actually think that the journey is really, really important. And kind of thinking, oh, I know exactly what I want to do, and trying to follow those steps if you're kind of climbing a ladder is very limiting. So I would encourage people to really try completely different things. Say, you know what, I'm really passionate about what I'm seeing right now happening in Thailand, and I love art, you know, go for it and go and spend a year there or spend 6 months and try and live and experience and do different things that you love in that moment, because at some point the career path will form. And if you decide too early and you try to follow very particular steps, you'll miss out. So I would definitely encourage everyone to try and experience a breadth of different things.
Yeah, that was something that was really important to me in like choosing a college, was having that flexibility to try a lot of different things, because I feel like there's so much pressure to, again, as I said earlier, choose a career path, but also stick to it even in college, like take a certain set of classes, lock yourself in. So I think that's good to know that there's, every experience you have kind of helps you decide what you want to do. But I was curious for college, what was your college experience like? How did you decide where to go? And then did you feel like your college journey influenced your career path? I know you talked earlier about taking that development class, but was there any other ways you felt like it impacted you?
Yes, definitely. Now you're taking me back and I have to think about this. Because sometimes it feels like college was only a few years ago, and I realized no, it was a little bit longer than that. How I chose college, I chose Wellesley because I went and I remember doing a big college tour with my mom, and we stopped in a number of different places. And I just remember going into the library and absolutely falling in love with it. There were signs everywhere that said Wellesley women who will make a difference in the world. And I just felt like there was this incredible energy in the library of people who were just driven and wanted to have an impact, and was very different to some of the other places that I went to visit. And I saw everyone scrolling through Facebook. And so I just felt like, no, this is it. This is the place for me. Um, it was really hard. It was a very difficult place. Um, but I think it formed me. I think all those challenges there formed the person that I am. And in terms of career paths, I mean, they had many opportunities. And I think almost any college, especially in the US, but these amazing opportunities to study abroad, to do summer internships abroad. I just remember getting scholarships to do a research project in South Africa on Jewish anti-apartheid activists. And that was a huge transformative experience for me. So I ended up spending 6 weeks there. It was my first time on the continent. I got to spend a lot of time traveling around, just interviewing people, learning from them, talking about social justice to people who were involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And all this was funded by college, which was incredible. And then I got a chance to go back and present about it. So I did feel like there were all of these opportunities that encourage the growth. So definitely encourage everyone to take advantage of anything that exists like that. And then I think of the pressure and that was there that you were talking about earlier, with kind of following a certain career path, in many ways pushed me in the opposite direction. I saw a lot of people going into sort of investment banking or thinking about going into consulting and having to go through all the tests to get in. And I just thought, no, I need the complete opposite of this. And so I went and did a fellowship, as the Jewish Peace Corps type thing in India, and it changed my life. And it defined what I really wanted to do, past that. I did that course and then did this, and have basically done international development. And one of the biggest markets that I work in right now is India. And the fact that I spent and lived a year and lived and worked in India for a year makes such a difference when I'm doing business there. So yeah, that's, I think, kind of trying lots of different things. And I think college offers so many opportunities to meet people from different backgrounds, to take different classes and things that you wouldn't normally, and take advantage of all those small scholarships and programs that you can do.
Awesome. Could you talk more about that Jewish fellowship slash Peace Corps thing you were talking about?
Yes, I don't know if it exists anymore, unfortunately. So if not, I was looking at the Peace Corps as well, because I just thought that would be amazing. But I wanted something that was this. This was through the American Jewish World Service, and I know that the Joint Distribution Committee also has a similar year-long fellowship. It essentially placed me in Ahmedabad in India, in the state of Gujarat, and did basically there were 10 of us in the fellowship, and everyone was placed into a different NGO that spoke to them. I was working at the Center for Social Justice, looking at human rights education. That was something I was really passionate about at the time. Still, that's what I thought I was going to do at some point as well. And I was placed with roommates who were local to Ahmedabad, who were working there as lawyers or paralegals at the Center for Social Justice, and spent a year doing anything that they needed. So everything from writing the curriculum in English to writing grants to helping with publications. But more than anything, really just trying to understand and learn about that world and that experience there. Actually, my closest friend from my master's program did a similar fellowship in Ukraine. And so I think that there is some kind of kinship to people who end up doing things like the Peace Corps or similar type fellowships, where you're just kind of thrown in with some kind of support network, but are really pushed outside of your comfort zone, um, and are expected to contribute, or at least to contribute by learning and being yourself.
Oh, that sounds like a really impactful experience. I'm going to Morocco just for the summer, not like participating in any NGOs, but I'm excited to like get that immersive experience. So could you talk also about the master's program you did, and if you feel like um, graduate experiences and degrees are kind of worth it, at least in the industry you're in?
Yes, I would say that the master's degree that I did was fantastic for me, but I also have seen a lot of people do master's degrees that they are still paying for. So I definitely think had mine been more expensive than it was, I wouldn't have done it. Mine was essentially free because I got a big scholarship for it, and and it was in Israel, which was much cheaper. So I have a real challenge with the cost of higher education, just because I think it's very unfair to students, and hopefully there'll be loan forgiveness. So we'll see about that. But the master's I did was in diplomacy, well, in government and diplomacy. Again, thinking I would then join the foreign service, and I have to say it was incredible because I ended up having a lot of very practical courses on negotiations, which at the time I thought, oh, I don't know if I'm going to go into the foreign service anymore. I do this international development, and they're still the skills that I use to this day in negotiations, and the lessons that I drew from that I use it in my day-to-day life at home with my husband, with my kids, with my friends. So if you can find a master's degree that has practical workshops like that, I mean, that's the course to do.
I mean, that's great. And I feel like a lot of life is just convincing people to do things. So even if you're not in the
Absolutely.
foreign service,
Absolutely.
that's good to know. Do you speak any languages other than English? And do you think that was a helpful skill to have or that people should try to cultivate?
Yes. So I grew up speaking Hebrew, English, and Spanish, which I realized also a bit of an unfair advantage because then it just made learning languages much easier. And it's, yes, I think it's incredibly helpful. I later learned French and tried to learn Arabic, but it was very hard. So that I didn't make it with that. But those languages definitely help. I'm convinced that the fact that I spoke Spanish fluently helped me get my jobs with the American Jewish World Service, because I had to go to Nicaragua and we just needed someone that could really be fluent. I also find that speaking languages, when I speak each language, I'm almost a slightly different person. And I realize that it's because I just kind of personify the language. And I think that's a skill that really comes in handy in the global world that we live in. So we live in a world where we're constantly going to be negotiating with different countries, with people of different cultures, of different backgrounds. And I think that speaking different languages is an experience that not only, yes, it's a skill of particular languages, but it's also an experience of how to take on different aspects of a personality and to understand that people have different aspects of their own personalities. And so it creates a sort of empathy, I think, that is very helpful, like a cultural empathy that's very helpful in any kind of business and any kind of career path. So yes, I definitely encourage learning more languages.
Got it. That's great to hear. I'm studying Arabic now, so I know what you mean when you say it's very hard. Uh, I took
You
like high
got
school French.
it.
I'm trying. I'm thinking of doing Hebrew in college, but no, it's good to know that
I
that
think
does
Hebrew is
add up.
easier than Arabic.
And then also I wanted to ask because you're not just any accomplished, speaker. You're also an accomplished speaker who is an alumna of AMP Global Youth, which is super exciting. So I was hoping you could talk about what your experiences with AMP have been and how you felt they may or may not have helped you with your career.
Yeah, so I actually was part of AMP when it was still called Americans for Informed Democracy. I think there was a name change a few years ago. And I led the summer workshops for a couple of years. And I definitely helped to form some of my career because I don't even know how I ended up doing it. I met Karen and she's amazing and we just really connected and I had so much fun doing it one year. I just did it again. Um, but it was very interesting. I definitely think that it helped me in shaping the way that I thought about programming, the way I thought about speaking with people at very high levels. And I was just I had to lead a group of students to go and speak to ambassadors and pretend like I know, like I'm fully confident and qualified to do this as someone in my early 20s. And I have absolute imposter syndrome. I'm like, there's no way. I'm like a 22-year-old. But it was so encouraging because after that, I learned to have it gave me a lot of confidence to go and just ask for meetings and speak in front of big groups of people and talk about challenging topics and in globalization, in global politics. So it gave me a lot, and I could see that what it gave the other students as well. Just all those different experiences of being able to go to all the different institutions we went to, the think tanks, the professors, the diplomats. It was really cool. Just a group of 20 people that get to sit down and have a one-to-one chat with ambassadors or the head of a think tank.
Yeah, that's amazing. I can't wait for programs to be kind of back in person. We did a little bit last summer, but it's just those experiences are gonna just be even more and more. And then I was gonna say, as a woman, kind of working in these international development and international relations spaces, did you ever do you feel like your identity as a woman influenced the way you were treated at all, especially working in countries that may have had, I guess, more patriarchal gender norms or ideas about women? Do you feel like that affected it at all?
Without a doubt. And that's actually one of the reasons I'm very glad I ended up going to women's college, because I think it gave me a lot of confidence that I needed in order to make it in this community of businesses. Um, I often find that I am one of the few women in a meeting, the few women in the room at all, and it is definitely challenging. And that's one of the reasons there are so many of these groups of like female founders or female CEOs, like women in women's health, because even in women's health, it's dominated by men. It's just incredible. Like, how are you creating products for me? You don't have my body parts. So somehow that happens. So it has been a huge part of my identity. And I find that it can brings together, creates a certain bond and closeness with other women in the space, and is really something I tell my two daughters. Like, they're very young, but I tell them, like, you're just going to have to work harder because that's the world that we're in, but it's going to make you better, and you're going to make the world a better place because of it. So I do find that oftentimes I have to prove myself more. It is challenging, it's unfair, and I can only hope that it's going to be different by the time that my girls are my age or at this place in their career. And in order to get there, we need more women investors, more women-led companies, more females head of design and product. Uh, so, hopefully you and others will continue this and, and keep changing and making the world better for us, for everyone.
That's great. And I'm sure as you've seen in more like for-profit spaces, it's probably good for business to have more women anyway. Like half the population is female. So having women in those spaces is, as you said, a win-win for everyone. So that's great. Thank you for sharing. And then finally, we're kind of towards the end of our time, but if you like just looking at, I guess, the span of your career and educational experience, if you could, knowing what you know now, kind of redo anything, is there anything you would change, or do you feel like all of your experiences have kind of contributed positively to who you've become?
I wouldn't remove anything. But I would say I definitely would have added things like a better understanding of certain courses. Personal finance, I think, is something that is not taught enough. And when I was a senior in college, they just started a workshop on personal finance and selected, 10 or 15 people were able to take it. I realize now that that is something that everyone should know how to do. We should all be given courses on how to file our taxes, how to think about investing, how to think about our futures, our pensions. These are really almost basic skills that I've had to learn on the go, how to get a mortgage, how to buy a house, things like that. So that's something that I felt was very much missing in my education, and I hope it's formalized, or if not formalized, at least available, so that people can go and say, I'm going to take one of these courses online. It's like, how do I apply for a mortgage? What are the best mortgages to find? Things like that. But other than that, I would say I definitely wouldn't attract anything, because even the hard experiences were well worth it. The hard courses that I cried in, and even any kind of challenges, it's part of what formed me and shaped me.
I think that's a great attitude to have. So, thank you so much. Do you have anything else you feel like you want to mention or bring up before we end?
What are you planning to do next?
That's a good question. So I'm currently a senior in high school, so I'm planning on going off to college. I finally committed to Harvard to study government as of now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'm really excited. Looking forward to exploring a lot of different topics though to see, but I feel like I'm in the headspace that you were talking about that you were when you were my age. So, who knows,
Please
as
stay
you've
in
said,
touch.
right? I love that. Thank you so much. But yeah, thank you so much for like giving your time today. I'm sure a lot of people are in the same shoes as I am and as you were. So it's really helpful to have mentors and people we can look up to serve as models for our careers. So thank you so much for your time and giving back to AMP. And yeah, thank
Absolutely.
you.
And I'm available if anyone wants to reach out. Always happy to have chats, and good luck.
Thank you so much.